Hi folks, me again. First off, the world isn't flat. I was just messing about with you. That's from my last video. Okay, today I'd like to give you some information on the Judaic roots of Freemasonry and also a bit more on the OTO, Ordo Templis Orientis. This involves reading a whopping 7.5 pages from this book again, Blood on the Altar by Craig Heimbishner. Okay, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. From pages 8 to 10. Although it is beyond the scope of this book to give a foundational history of Freemasonry, the essence of Freemasonry can be traced to the current of ancient Sumerian worship of Shaitan, or Satan. This current was given shape in ancient Egypt and Babylon, but ironically was most effectively preserved from disintegration through the oral teaching of its rabbinical heirs in the forms of the traditions of the ancients, or elders. In the Old Testament, the Israelites were drawn repeatedly to the ways of Egypt, the most striking symbolical moment being the worship of the golden calf in Exodus 32, chapters 1 to 35. Verses 1 to 35. The Egyptian-inspired rabbinical oral teaching was later opposed by Jesus Christ, but nonetheless survived the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, after which it was gradually committed to writing by rabbis and became known as the Babylonian Talmud and the Kabbalah. The tyrannical discipline of the pagan priesthood of Egypt and Babylon was veiled in the Talmud beneath references to the scriptures of the Israelites. Similarly, the Kabbalah preserved an occult teaching within an occasional appearance of piety, orthodoxy, and commentaries on the Mosaic texts of the Pentateuch. This formalized religion of bureaucratic oppression, Talmud, and pagan gnosis, Kabbalah, became known after 70 AD as Judaism, utterly distinct from the Old Testament-only form of religion that was practiced in the centuries after Christ by the tiny minority of Judaic Karaites who suffered violent persecution at the hands of the rabbis, even having their tongues cut out or being flogged to death in Castile, Spain, from the 11th century forward, for refusing to acknowledge the authority of the rabbis in Judaism's own version of the Inquisition, neatly consigned to historical oblivion. I've looked up this Inquisition. It's difficult to find information on them. The rabbinically reworked Gnosis survived apostolic opposition and the denunciations of early church fathers by sowing confusion within Christendom, where it was often mistaken for the sola scripta creed of the ancient Israelites, rather than what it was, a sect top-heavy with unscriptural man-made tradition and pagan superstition. The Egyptian legacy of Osiris, Isis and Horus, of Set-An and Shaitan, thus survived, preserved in Judaism as though in a petri dish. As this strange infection was transmitted through generation after generation, it sought new carriers and attempted to spread through covers and fronts. The occult current mutated into various forms, from the Manichaeans and Carpocratians to the Cathars and Bogomils. A virulent strain appeared when the Knights Templars were corrupted and transformed into an occult order. The order was crushed by altar and throne and driven again underground. A solid occult beachhead was established in England under Elizabeth I, culminating in the Rosicrucian movement, the Renaissance exaltation of magic and alchemy by Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, 1486 to 1535, and Paracelsus, 1493 to 1541, and later the formation of a socially accepted system of lodges free to recruit respectable men. This English lodge system, exoterically a brotherhood and fraternal order copied from the Catholic Guild of Stonemasons, used the symbols of stonemasonry to teach apparently moral lessons, but actually imported Kabbalistic symbols from Judaism and reserved its occult teachings for higher initiates. Hence, the new Masonic Lodge became the powerful inner occult channel between countries as it spread across Europe and to America. Thus was born Freemasonry. Okay, skip forward to chapter 7, page 83, the Judaic connection. For the good of Masonry generally, but the Jewish nation in particular. Royal Arch degree of Freemasonry. Quote, the wealthy Austrian industrialist Karl Kellner decided around 1895 to pass on his own initiation into tantric yoga to an inner circle of followers. Kellner's accomplice Theodor Reuss, an fanatical Anglo-German Freemason, brought Masonic charters in every high degree he could lay his hands on. By 1902, Reuss had imported Scottish Rite and Memphis and Mizraim Freemasonry to Germany. Kellner occupied himself with yoga and Memphis and Mizraim Masonry. Reuss and Kellner conceived of a new outer order through which they could select Masons for training in Kellner's trumpeted concoction of Tantra. At the same time, Reuss had revived the old Order of the Illuminati, said to have started in Bavaria by Adam Weishaupt in 1776, and later grafted onto Grand Orient Freemasonry. Reuss also worked with the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, from which came the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and Martinism, which is French Illuminist Masonry. Reuss was also linked in its early years to Blavatsky's Theosophical Society through Franz Hartmann. But it would be a mistake to see the OTO as an essentially German occult phenomenon grafted onto a bloody tantric sex magic. The pivotal source for Reuss was the sex-magical Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, also known as Luxor, a secret society which included Madame Blavatsky and Pappus, the advisor to Tsar Nicholas of Russia. As Jocelyn Godwin and his co-researchers observe, the teachings of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, HB of L, note that name, fed the streams of sexual practice flowing in the Ordo Templis Orientis of Theodor Reuss and eventually into the works of Aleister Crowley. Once the secret was out, linking occultism with sex, it was impossible to ignore, and in consequence practically every occult order after the 1880s has some debt to the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light. But whose secret was it? Max Theon, Supreme God, translation, was Grand Master of the Egyptian Hermetic Brotherhood of Light in the 1870s. Theon lived in a vast villa named Zarif near Tlemcen in Algeria. A frequent visitor to England and France, Theon's true name was Louis Maximilian Bimstein. Bimstein was the son of Rabbi Judas Lion Bimstein of Warsaw, Poland. It might be Bimstein. Godwin writes, one concludes that Theon must have spent much of his existence under false names or false identity papers, and that he did not hesitate to give wrong information to the authorities. Theon Bimstein was initiated at age 18 in Hasidic Judaism before he left Poland. He also gained initiation into Kabbalah. The wealthy Jacob Frank, originally Jacob Leibowitz, stressed the Zohar, Book of Radiance or Splendor, the most important text of the Kabbalah in Judaism. While the Talmud codified the bureaucratic side of Judaism, the Kabbalah conveyed the mysticism of black magic. The Zohar taught in a sexual split within God, the integration of which required intercourse and Judaic conquest. Frank emphasized the sexual teaching, although he certainly did not originate it, as it maintained by current rabbinical disinformation. A few Orthodox rabbis have made a pretext of opposing the Kabbalah, and Kabbalah opposition has been ascribed to Rabbi Moses Maimonides, but according to Michael A. Hoffman II, this is a hoax intended for Gentile consumption. Quote, the alleged opposition or incompatibility between Kabbalistic Judaism and, for example, the halakhic Judaism of Maimonides is a fallacy. Maimonides was revered by many of the seminal Kabbalists of all time, including Rabbi Chaim David Azulai, Rabbi Gershon Henoch of Radzin, Rabbi Yitzhak, the Komano Rebbe, and the preeminent Kabbalist Rav Abraham Abulafia, a former influence on Moses called Devero and Chaim Vital. Abulafia esteemed Maimonides' famous book The Guide of the Perplexed as a Kabbalistic text. The Kabbalah is considered advanced Judaism for the few, as Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz writes in The Essential Talmud, page 212, quote, "There was a world of mysticism and mystery that was concealed from the general public and transmitted only to a chosen few. These esoteric subjects were therefore taught by the rabbi to only one chosen disciple, and in some cases the teacher confined himself to the outlines of the subject without going into detail. The stringent restrictions on esoteric interpretation were relaxed gradually during the Middle Ages. By the beginning of the modern era, the Kabbalah, literally tradition, transmittal, was an important and even central element in Jewish thought. Much of what we can surmise of the esoteric world of the Talmudic sages is based on this literature and the light it casts on the hints contained in the Talmud. The occult is extolled in the Kabbalah as a necessary descent to complete one's transformation. According to the rabbinic lies told about the patriarch Abraham, he made his descent, according to Zohar 181b, and had to know all those levels that are connected below, which Daniel Matt calls the dark underside of wisdom, and which Matt candidly links not to the wisdom of the God of Israel, but to the gnosis of the magicians of pagan Egypt. This wisdom of Egypt included magic and alchemy. Abraham's descent symbolizes his exploration of Sitra Abra, the other side, the abyss. This dangerous psychic journey is the crucible of Abraham's spiritual transformation. That's a quote from Daniel Matt, Zohar, the Book of Enlightenment. This psychic journey is called by Kenneth Grant the night side of Eden, the negative side of the Lurianic tree of life, and it requires of the initiate the full embrace of the demonic. The essential teachings of the Kabbalah were summarized by the late Professor Israel Shahak of Hebrew University, Jerusalem. Quote, "From the first cause, first a male god called wisdom or father, and then a female goddess called knowledge or mother, were emanated or born. From the marriage of these two, a pair of younger gods were born. Son, also called by many other names such as Small Face or the Holy Blessed One, and daughter, also called Lady or Matronit, a word derived from Latin, Shekinah, Queen, and so on. These two younger gods should be united, but their union is prevented by the machinations of Satan, who in this system is a very important and independent personage. The creation of the Jewish people was undertaken in order to mend the break caused by Adam and Eve, and under Mount Sinai this was for a moment achieved. The male god's son, incarnated in Moses, was united with the goddess Shekinah. The Jewish conquest of Palestine from the Canaanites and the building of the first and second temple are particularly propitious for their union. The duty of pious Jews is to restore through their prayers and religious acts the perfect divine unity in the form of sexual union between the male and female deities. Thus before most ritual acts which every devout Jew has to perform many times each day, the following Kabbalistic formula is recited: for the sake of the Congress of the Holy Blessed One and his Shekinah, the sexual congress. The Jewish morning prayers are also arranged so as to promote this sexual union, if only temporarily. Successive parts of the prayer mystically correspond to successive stages of the union. At one point the goddess approaches with her handmaidens, at another the god puts his arm around her neck and fondles her breast, and finally the sexual act is supposed to take place. That's all from Israel Shahak, Jewish History, Jewish Religion. From the preceding passage one can see that the Frankist sexual teaching is not spurious red Kabbalah, but rather a legitimate part of the system of occult interpretation which the Zohar teaches will lead to both a completed deity and a completed Judaic male, which are ultimately one and the same. Louis Binstein, or Max Theon, took this secret and disseminated it, omitting certain other facets of the Kabbalah, such as the teaching that Gentiles are the limbs of Satan. In Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz's study of the Tanya of Schneur Zalman, the founder of the Chabad Lubavitch branch of Hasidic Judaism, we read that the second soul of the Jew is a part of God, above, literally, while the souls of the nations of the world, however, derive from the other impure kelipot, demonic shells, which contain no good whatever, as is written in Etz Chaim, Portal 49, Chapter 3. The old Hermetic Brotherhood of Light worked as a means of occulturating the masses, giving them a few tidbits of the Kabbalah while withholding the real secrets, similar to the Kabbalah Center of Rabbi Yehuda Berg, one of the mentors of Madonna and Britney Spears. By this means, occultists and New Agers could believe they had reached the advanced secrets of the Kabbalah, while in reality Bimstein and others withheld key teachings, including the doctrine of the non-humanity of the Gentiles. From this double-minded double cross rose the supposedly final Masonic revelations, which were systemized by Royce. Kellner fell terminally ill in 1904, and Royce, excited by the Kabbalistic secrets, began recruiting members of Scottish Rite and Memphis Mizraim Freemasonry, also sexual in its advanced degrees, for a new emerging order. Kellner died in the following year. By 1906, the order had crystallized into the Ordo Templis Orientis. Soon Royce's Masonic publication, the Oriflamme, announced the OTO. Eventually, Royce claimed that all of the secret knowledge of high-degree Freemasonry had been distilled by the OTO into a system of 11 degrees. The first 3 degrees were essentially similar to any Blue Lodge. The 4th through the 6th degrees captured the most important and powerful points of initiation in nearly all high-degree systems: the Royal Arch, Rose Croix, and Kadosh rituals. The 7th degree furnished theory for the 8th and 9th degrees, which consisted of sex magic. The 8th involves magical masturbation, and the 9th, coitus, the sanctuary of the gnosis. The 10th degree conferred administration over a country, supreme and holy king, while the 11th contained a homosexual version of the 9th. In spite of his trappings mentioning Gnostic Christianity, Royce's instructions were based on the Kabbalah of the rabbis, which in fact preceded and inspired the early Gnostic heresies. The antiquity of the Kabbalah has been confirmed by Professor Moshe Idel of Hebrew University, compare Kabbalah New Perspectives. The Jewish Encyclopedia states concerning Gnosticism, Jewish Gnosticism unquestionably antedates Christianity. Magic, also, was not an unimportant part of the doctrines and manifestations of Gnosticism, which largely occupied Jewish thinkers. It is a noteworthy fact that heads of Gnostic schools and founders of Gnostic systems are designated as Jews by the Church Fathers. Some derive